The courtroom was already restless when the judge leaned forward and smiled politely. An 8-year-old black boy stood alone beside the defense table, his feet barely touching the floor. A few quiet chuckles rippled through the room. Some jurors exchanged looks that said the same thing. Why is a child even here? Then the judge asked one simple question, meant to end the matter quickly. What happened next didn't just stop the courtroom. It exposed a truth so powerful, so unexpected, that even the judge forgot how to breathe, because in that moment everyone realized they had made a terrible mistake. Before we go any further, take a second to stay with this story, because what this child says next will challenge everything you think you know about justice. His name was Illy Carter. Illy was small for his age, with neatly braided hair and a navy blue sweater that had been passed down from his older cousin. His mother had pressed it carefully that morning, even though her hands were shaking the entire time. She wanted him to look respectful, serious, like he belonged there, because to many people Illy didn't. The courtroom was part of a county courthouse in a quiet American town where most people knew each other, or thought they did. It was the kind of place where assumptions lived comfortably, never questioned, especially when it came to kids like Illy. Illy's father had been arrested 2 months earlier after a traffic stop turned into a legal mess. What should have been a routine procedure quickly escalated, and now his father was facing charges that could change their lives forever. The evidence was complicated, the case was messy, and Illy, against all expectations, had asked to speak. Not because anyone told him to, but because he believed something important had been missed. The judge, a seasoned man with decades on the bench, had agreed reluctantly. He assumed this would be brief. Symbolic, something to make the child feel heard before the real adults took over. The prosecutor looked bored, the defense attorney looked nervous, the jury looked confused, and Illy stood there quietly, hands folded, eyes focused. Not wandering, not afraid. To everyone else, he was just a kid. To himself, he was there to tell the truth. The judge cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. Illy, he said gently, in the same tone adults often used when they expected nonsense. Do you understand where you are? Illy nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The judge raised an eyebrow, surprised by the calm in the boy's voice. And do you understand why your father is here? Yes, sir. The prosecutor leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, already convinced this was a waste of time. A few jurors smiled softly, the way people do when they expect something innocent and harmless. The judge continued, Why don't you tell us what you wanted to say? Illy took a small breath. He glanced briefly toward his father, who was seated behind the defense table, eyes filled with fear and pride at the same time. Then Illy looked back at the judge. My dad is being charged because they say he didn't follow lawful instructions. Illy began. But the instructions were not lawful. The room shifted. The judge blinked. Can you explain what you mean by that? Illy nodded again. Yes, sir. The officer told my dad to step out of the car without stating a legal reason. Under state law, an officer must provide reasonable suspicion before escalating a traffic stop. A murmur spread across the courtroom. The prosecutor straightened up. The defense attorney's pen froze midair. The judge leaned forward now, not smiling anymore. And how do you know that? The judge asked. Illy swallowed, but his voice stayed steady. My mom and I read the statute together. Title 18, Section 421. It's written in plain language. Some jurors exchanged looks, no longer amused. The prosecutor stood abruptly. Objection, Your Honor. This is inappropriate. The child is being coached. Illy turned toward the prosecutor before the judge could respond. With respect, sir, coaching wouldn't change what the law says. The courtroom went silent. The judge raised a hand slowly, signaling the prosecutor to sit. Go on, Illy, he said quietly. Illy continued, explaining how the officer's report contradicted dashcam footage, how the timeline didn't align, how certain rights were never read. He spoke carefully, choosing his words, not rushing, like someone who understood the weight of every sentence. Each point landed harder than the last. The jurors were no longer leaning back. They were leaning in. The judge's face grew serious, his earlier assumptions visibly cracking. This wasn't a performance. This wasn't memorized lines. This was understanding. And with every word, the courtroom was being forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Not just about the case, but about how quickly they had underestimated the child standing before them. Illy paused. For the first time his hands trembled. The judge noticed. "Take your time," he said softly. Illy looked up, eyes shining but unbroken. "There's one more thing," he said. The room held its breath. "My dad always tells me that the law is supposed to protect people who don't have power," Illy continued. "But if no one listens when something goes wrong, then the law stops working." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is the officer's written statement," Illy said, "and this is the time stamp from the dashcam." The judge stood up. That had never happened before, not like this. He took the paper from Illy's hands and studied it closely. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the pages shift. Then the judge looked at the prosecutor. "Why wasn't this discrepancy addressed?" he asked. The prosecutor opened his mouth, then closed it. The judge turned toward the jury, then toward the defense. "Court is recessed," he said firmly. Gasps filled the room. Moments later, after a tense review behind closed doors, the judge returned. He cleared his throat, emotion visible in his eyes. "This court acknowledges that critical evidence was overlooked," he said, "and that testimony, regardless of the age of the speaker, has revealed a serious failure in procedure." He looked directly at Illy. "Thank you," the judge said, "for reminding us what justice is supposed to look like." The courtroom didn't applaud. They didn't need to. Everyone was already standing in silence. The charges against Illy's father were dismissed that day. Not quietly, not brushed aside, but with a formal acknowledgement of error. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, not to chase a headline but to witness something rare. A child who spoke truth without anger. A courtroom that was forced to listen. Illy's father knelt down and hugged him tightly, tears soaking into that navy blue sweater. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. But Illy didn't smile the way people expected. Instead, he looked thoughtful. "I just said what was right," he replied. In the weeks that followed, the story spread, not because of drama, but because of dignity. Schools invited Illy to speak. Law professors referenced the case. And the judge, once confident in his assumptions, publicly admitted that he had been wrong. That mattered, because racism doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through lowered expectations, through polite smiles, through the quiet belief that some voices don't carry weight. That day, an 8-year-old boy proved otherwise. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand respect. He earned it by knowing his worth and standing in truth when no one expected him to. Never underestimate a voice, because justice often speaks through the ones we least expect.